Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the podcast that shares ideas on how to upgrade your lead generation. Here is your host, Glenn Schmeltzley.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. We're going to talk about how you can improve your lead generation as part of our second season, which focuses on advanced lead generation tactics. If you want to catch some of the previous episodes, we've been talking with people like Amanda Relier-Voss about social media tactics. We've also talked with Andres Tovar about conversational marketing. You can go and catch those episodes at funnelreboot.com or on your podcast player by subscribing. But today, we're going to talk about how your content strategy works and how you can think about it strategically. Now, the primary reason we're told to focus on content is SEO, but the true beneficiary of well-structured content, it isn't search engines at all. Another myth that we get tossed our way is that focusing on keywords will win SEO contests, when there's actually more to it than that. To improve how your content performs, it all boils down to following the fundamentals of communication. And our guest is someone whose strategies get to the heart of this. He's a 30-year marketing veteran who has done copywriting and marketing as a coach, under his own consultancy, and within an agency. He's active in industry associations, spoken on stage at conferences, holds many industry certifications, and has written many published articles. As you hear our conversation, you'll hear him refer to many sources. There's a half dozen books that guided his thinking on sales and marketing, and there's tools and conceptual frameworks mentioned and companies that he's worked with. All of these are put in the show notes with links, so I encourage you to go and check those out. But I also want you to listen to him tell on a personal level how he got into this field and how, as a young salesperson, it was his fear of being rejected that led him to writing marketing content and becoming so good at it that he left sales to actually move into delivering copywriting services. He covers a lot of ground here, and I hope you listen through the whole thing. Let's get into it. So my guest to talk about wrangling content for great site performance is someone who's been at this for the better part of 30 years. And he holds over a dozen certifications in fields like SEO, digital marketing, and e-commerce. And he has a record of being a person who single-handedly, on the day of a launch of a new product, had copy written that brought in over $1 million of revenue. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome our guest. And why don't you tell us who you are?
Well, thanks, Glenn. So yeah, my name is, the thing is, my name is Michel Fortin, which is a very French-Canadian name, but most of my clients for the better part of 30 years has always been Americans, and trying to get an American to say Michel is kind of hard, right? They all think that's a girl's name. So Michael Fortin, I remember I spoke at a seminar in Chicago, my very first seminar back in the late 90s. And they introduced me as Michael Fortin. So I kind of stuck with that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming. And I know that we have a fair number of things that we want to delve into that help people understand how their content is such a pivotal piece here. Let's maybe start first with just acknowledging how we are in an age where search engines have as much importance as they ever did. Search is, of course, one of the main ways that we are able to get people's attention, or as we used to call it, media. But why don't you tell us a little bit about how search is just one of the few ways that people can consider people coming to their site. And I know that there's a couple of good models out there. So why don't you tell us what you consider to be the different types of media?
Oh, well, I talk about the tripod of digital marketing, and now there's a kind of a fourth step, which is the shared media. We talked a little bit about this before the podcast today, but there's earned, owned, and paid media, and those are the three the tripod of digital marketing that most agencies, I've worked in an agency and I currently am one right now. And those are the three types of channels or three types of media that people or most of my clients want to expand on, amplify, and buy more into in order to create awareness about their brand, their product, their service, their offering, and of course to generate mostly three things: traffic, leads, and sales.
Fantastic. And so you mentioned the shared one. So we have P for paid, E for earned, and then that S, which basically people are likening to social, and then O for owned, which is things that you have brought together, like your own email newsletter, your house list. And so together those spell peso. That was coined by Jenny Dietrich. And that's a great way of kind of representing. But let's jump into the earned media because I find it interesting. I mean, I have a sizable amount of time in the paid media space, but paid and earned media both share one major thing, which is search engines. And tell me how you have seen the evolution of search engines and how it's different today than it was, let's say, a decade ago, with what you needed to do to be able to get earned media from search engines.
Well, I remember back in the day when search engines first started, people used them primarily just to find stuff, right? It was just to find websites that they wanted to reach, because back then websites were brand new and a lot of people didn't know domain names. And of course, there were some domain names that people were hooked on and they could have just typed it in. But the fact is that search engines mostly back then was about finding stuff. Today, now it's about researching stuff or finding information about stuff or what people are saying about stuff. So now we are in a world where search engines are not just a way to find websites. It's actually to help you make a decision, help you to find a location, maybe to find information that people are talking about, reviewing a particular product or service. So search engines have grown so much now that it's no longer a search tool. It is now a decision-making tool.
Yeah, they used to be called directories, right?
Right, exactly. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Oh, man. And I remember back in the day, especially whenever this is before the internet. You said earlier that I've been doing this for 30 years. I remember back in the day when I was doing this on bulletin board services, back where there was no real internet that we know today. and now, and back then too, a lot of websites that were created were not websites proper. They were kind of shopping malls. So you would buy a page or a spot on the shopping mall. Why? Because most people were used to yellow pages and buying an ad or a page or a listing, on the yellow pages. It was the same thing as the internet. And the way they positioned it, I remember, my gosh, back in 91, 92, they said, oh, you know what? When people are looking or they know they want to have your product or service, they can find you online as well as they can find you on the yellow pages. And so that's what started the whole process. But nowadays, people are making decisions based on what people are saying about a product or service. We look at a lot of the major shifts that search engines have gone through. We see now reviews being really critical in search engine results, not just information about the product. Now we have what we call schema or schema markup, where people are given specific definitions, descriptions, or what people are saying about a specific product or service. And that's kind of what search engines are now.
Yeah, that's great. It has gotten more complicated, and what that has elevated the game of is, of course, what every marketer needs to do, which is to understand how those different modes that a person is in relate to what is on their website. Let's start by maybe talking a little bit about that psychology inside the buyer's mind. I know you like to have a couple of little acronyms that you use to describe the different times at which a person is there. I've heard you talk about there's an intent stage, an informational stage, a navigational stage, a transactional stage. Can you take us through those?
Sure. So, and I'm just going to back up a little bit because I want to explain something that's really important.
Sure.
The number one key that when people want to do any kind of search engine optimization, And in fact, I kind of coined it. Well, I coined a term. I think I've heard about it. It's called search experience optimization. And I used to say SEO no longer stands for search engine optimization. It's search experience optimization. And now I kind of
Right.
see SXO being
Yeah.
an acronym.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's because it's all about the experience that people go through when they're looking for information and finding that information and consuming that information. So search engine no longer is just about typing in a word or keyword and then finding something. It's about the intent of the person looking for that information. Search intent is now probably one of the most important keys in search engine optimization. And then search intent means, are people looking for just information? Are they looking for maybe location or how to get to something or to somewhere? And finally, the transactional aspect. So they want to actually do something online, whether it's to call, buy, ask, fill out a form, download, and so on and so forth. And it's actually more transactional. So those three are probably the most important ones. There's kind of a fourth one as well, just like the shared media. There's one called commercial, and those are very specific to people actually making a purchase.
Okay.
And we see that with shopping ads, with all that stuff on search engine, by the way. But my point is that the mindset of the person doing the search is critical. And I created an acronym called OATH, and it's all about the level of awareness, because the content that you put on the other end to match that search intent will also be defined greatly by how aware are they about the problem and the solution, and then your solution. So
Okay. Take us through Oath.
Sure. So it's basically I say this: how prepared is your market to take an oath? So it's an acronym that stands for oblivious, apathetic, thinking, and hurting. And this goes back in my, I was a copywriter way before I became an SEO guy, and that kind of blended into an SEO copywriter, and then I became just an SEO guy. But it's all about the level of awareness that people have about the problem. Are they oblivious about the problem? They don't know they have a problem. And this is where your content has to be positioned in such a way where you educate them on the problem first before you actually kind of throw them an offer. The next one is they're apathetic, meaning they know about the problem, they know it, but they just don't care. They don't care enough about it. And that's where your content needs to elevate them into wanting to do something about it. The thinking is now they're thinking, they're shopping around, they're looking for alternatives, they're looking for information about the particular solution, maybe your solution. And of course, hurting is, well, they're hurting. They're looking for the buy now button. They want to buy right now. And they, the law of three gets: get in, get it, get out. And that's pretty much what they want to do. So knowing where they are also defines a lot of things. Like, for example, one of the most common questions I was asked as a copywriter was, Michel, long copy or short copy? I remember back in the day when Dan Kennedy used to write articles and oodles of articles about long copy and how long copy outsells short copy. Well, I define it as a way to understand how long your copy is based on how aware people are about the problem, because that way it'll define how much education you need to do in order to get them to buy your offering. Now, that is a long copy sales letter in the old days. And remember, the old days of the internet, we were just slapping on these direct mail pieces onto an electronic veil, so to speak, on an electronic monitor. But nowadays, we see that through either stages, like a drip campaign. We see that through dynamic information. We see that through different layers of information within a website. We talk about the top of funnel, middle of funnel, and bottom of funnel. All those things are kind of the same thing. It's just that they're more layered or graduated over a period of time rather than just being a long sales letter. But it's still that same process. What kind of awareness people have about the problem, and that will define also the search intent. Because if you're just looking for information, it also means, well, why are they looking for? Are they looking for information about the product, or maybe they're just looking for information on about their problem? Maybe they're not understanding their problem. Maybe they're doing a search or a query on what exactly they're experiencing, and is that a problem, and is that something that I should do something about?
Sure. Okay. So, and we are in an age where search engines are just so smart that if they figure out a person is at the O, A, T, or H standpoint. I guess we just have to trust that we can throw up our content and let the search engines crawl it and let them bring people to the right place where that information is. But that assumes, and it's a really big assumption, that we have all the information. We've covered all the topics. We have thought through what that person was needing to know at each one of those stages. I don't know about you, but I think each of us with our own websites is pretty aware it's got some gaps in it. How do you suggest we look at our own site and audit it with this in mind?
Well, you've just mentioned something about gap. Gap analysis is something that's very commonly done in the search engine sphere, and it's something that I do a lot with my clients. It's not only the gap between, for example, what you're offering in terms of content versus what your competitors are offering, and or what they're not offering, and you can and jump on, or what the market is looking for that they're not getting that information. And here's the thing, I talk about this. And it's drives me mad when people say keyword research, keyword research. Now, keyword research as a process, it's still fine.
Yeah.
But when I'm talking about doing keyword research for SEO purposes, it's no longer. I mean, I'm looking at some of these SEO, some of my competitors. They're selling these packages. Oh, we'll rank you for 5 vanity keywords.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is, keyword research in that space means nothing, because it's all about what people are, the search intent, really. It's about the topic. And the way, so to answer your question is, when you do, let's say you do a keyword research or you find a gap and then you type in the keyword, I say, look, do this. Go into a search engine, type in that keyword, and then see what Google thinks your search intent is. Then do kind of an analysis of the SERPs. Look at the search results. And then you can see what kind of, like, sometimes you put in soap. So is it soap opera? Is it
Right.
detergent soap? Is it, now we're in an age with COVID that hand washing is an important thing.
Yes.
So now longer tail keywords are more important. Topical research, topical clusters is more important. And of course, search intent based on what Google defines as what your intent is. And that way you can then write content around the intent that people are searching.
Sure. And are we trying to make sure that we put this on an intelligent place on our website? Because at various times I might be offering knowledge. At some other point, I might be trying to state that we have a product which is distinct in that topic area. I may even be, like you said, getting them into the, get in, get it, and get out kind of conversion stage. So do I now hold up my sitemap and look and see whether or not I can put some of these topics into each one of those places?
Well, content architecture from a search engine standpoint, from a ranking factor standpoint, is you want to kind of cluster these topics together so that they make sense. So that if a person lands on a piece of content and they want to dive in more, they want to know more about the content, and then they can do that from within that space.
Okay.
But here's the thing, and we can, there's various technical aspects, like how many clicks deep that content may be, or is there a lead capturing and a lead nurturing process in that process, right? So you have like a piece of content. Once they're done, do they just leave? They just got the information they wanted. Maybe they want to go into deeper. Maybe they would like to have more information. Maybe there's an opportunity for you to grab their information and then to educate them over a period of time and do, like, for example, a drip campaign, or bring them back to very specific piece of content on your website that is matching their search intent, and to like spoon feed them, whether it's by email, whether it's through a RSS feed, whether it's through a podcast, whatever the case is, so that eventually over time they become more and more interested, and then they make a decision, as opposed to a piece of content that really has a buy now button or a direct link to the path of buying the product, where they're at the herding stage, right? So I look at it as like a spokes of a wheel. So a topical cluster is basically the middle is the main topic, the major thing that is matching with what the audience is looking for. But then you've got all these spokes. So it could be variations. It could be deeper information. It could be alternatives. It could be reviews about specific products in that domain and industry or vertical.
Okay. I'm kind of getting it, and I'm welcoming you to share any examples that you have of clients where you've been able to help them get this hub and spoke going so that they can make sure that the person sees the related topics and stays engaged with that site. Because I imagine what we're trying to do, unless they're right at the herding stage, but that's a very small minority. But most people, I imagine what we're trying to do is to get them to hang around long enough so that they see our authority and expertise on the topic and that they take the next logical step that we want them to, right?
Absolutely. And you mentioned something that's actually very important, very key. As we all know, Google has made some major algorithm changes in the last couple of years. One of them is called EAT, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness.
Okay.
And the reason why that's key is because they will, now, in some cases, they will rank you higher because of that. Or in some cases, they will demote you because of the lack of that. And
Right.
and so here's what I say. Does your site, the content that you have on your site, does it have expertise? And this is before it used to be, related directly to what we call YMYL, your money, your life pages. But now it's pretty much a ranking factor throughout the entire internet. Google kind of is the the grandfather of all that stuff.
Yes.
But EAT, so expertise, is there expertise behind the person? I mean, I used to be a copywriter for an agency called The Success Doctor, and we were primarily writing copy for doctors, cosmetic surgeons, hair transplant surgeons, and so on and so forth, and chiropractors. And when the EAT came about, they called it a lot of times, a lot of experts called it the medic update, because a lot of articles or a lot of sites that were written by doctors, or at least were about health or medical related information, if there was lack of expertise, if they were not necessarily written by a doctor or reviewed by a doctor, or some kind of way that proves that there is an expertise behind the content, you would lose rankings. You would actually go down in rankings. So expertise, and then the authoritativeness. So is the site is an authority on that topic? Major sites that were linking back to the site. Is there proper linkage between the content on the site so that it makes sense to the searcher? And are people talking about it? Talking about, before it used to be backlinks, and backlinks are becoming less and less important. Now it's about brand mentions or people talking about, because Google is now smart enough to know that when you're talking about a specific thing, they know that you're talking about you or about a particular article or content that you have. Now, a link might be a direct signal, but now links are not as crucial as they used to be. Now Google is smart enough with their algorithm and machine learning to know that they're talking about that site. And then, of course, there is the trustworthiness. So trust factor of the article. And of course, this is all meant to bring down the scammers and stuff that is not really good on the internet these days.
Well, it's interesting. So the T is, for me, I mean, we've been talking about content since we started, and I get that touches on the E and the A. I think the T is the one that is probably the toughest. And I say that because I think about, yes, you need to say things on your site that make you seem trustworthy. And some of us on e-commerce sites, there'll be the trustee symbol or some kind of third party or a brief little, call out
but you also
testimonial. But it's more than that, right? Because I think what you've helped me understand is there's a definite impact on how that person is going to come to your site. That if they have found you by, let's say, organic search, that imbues your site right there with trustworthiness. Mm-hmm. And not that we're gaming it at all, but this is why we need to think about how that channel that they come to our website on has some bearing. We can't just, buy our way to trustworthiness. We have to think about how the psychology of the person works and how they say, well, at some point in that OATH, I would like to see that I found it from an organic site or from a reviewer or some social place where I trust that source. And if they're saying good things about this website, now I trust this website. Right?
Exactly. I mean, that's why reviews are so popular these days. And we started this whole conversation with talking about earned media. And that's probably one of the biggest earned media pieces or assets right now on the internet are reviews and review sites. Now you've got probably Google and Facebook, which are probably the two biggest review sites on the internet, but you've got TripAdvisor, you've got Yelp. I mean, I know now, I mean, when my wife and I, we want to buy a trip, for example, we look at a new location in the Caribbean, we will look at all the reviews, but we don't just look at the reviews on the actual site itself. We'll look for reviews on other sites about that resort, about that island, about that city, whatever the case is, because we want to get as much unbiased information as possible. And that's what trust, and there's also technical aspects. Is the site secure? Now Google is now alerting people when they visit a site that's not secure. So that's a level of trust. There's also a speed factor, a site that takes too long to load, or the usability factor. Is a site not usable, especially on a mobile device, because now Google is mostly mobile or mobile first indexation, right? So yeah. All those things add to that trust factor. And now there's a lot of rumors going around in the SEO community where they say, oh, usability is not really a ranking factor. And that's kind of true, because Google does not directly say it is. But indirectly, there's proof that it is, because a site that is not usable. I mean, look, Google Search Console now will identify sites that have very poor usability, where there's errors in how people see the site, the information, is it clear, is it big? And we have like things like AMP and all those things that help to load a site a lot faster. Well, those add to that trust factor. And so EAT are something that I absolutely want to impart on this conversation is, does your site have expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness? And what you can do to your site to increase all those three things will definitely increase. And back to what you were saying is, just by being found on the search engine in itself is a great element of trust.
Yeah, very good. So I want to make sure we cover what I know some of our listeners have, which is let's say a complex B2B type product, and where, they're sitting here listening going, yeah, but Michel, I can't get, tons of reviews because, we're bought by a handful of people in a year. And yet it's, a committee of people. So there's more than one person. And maybe I've got somebody kicking the tires technically on what we have, or maybe they're trying to decide between two different product lines that we have, and they're weighing, different data sheets that we have on our sales pages. Do you have any advice or stories of, times where you've helped somebody navigate through that and help them understand how all of these same principles can apply to them?
Sure. Well, one of my clients is actually an enterprise level of services, actually data migration services. And they've helped large clients all over the world, including the Shopping Channel, WestJet Airlines, and so on and so forth. It's MB Foster, by the way, MB Foster and Associates. And they have a lot of information on their site all about data migration and data integration, which is key. But here's the thing is that they have different levels, or they want to go into different levels of service offerings. So you've got let's do it everything, we'll do everything for you. And then there's the second, which is, well, here's the software that we put together to help you do it, but we'll kind of take you by the hand. So it's kind of like a second tier or second level of service. And then the third, which is basically you do it yourself. Here's the software, you go, you bring it to your people and your people can do it. And so there's various levels of awareness for all of those three, but there's also various levels of need. So you've got some enterprises that have very well-defined technical people on their staff that can do all of this. They just don't have the tools for it, as opposed to companies that are totally agnostic of let's say digital transformation. That's a huge trend these days, and they're kind of capitalizing on that trend, because now a lot of people are doing data migration to cloud services. You've got Google Cloud, you've got AWS, and all that stuff. Well, they do help those people, those clients, and so they have different levels of content on their website, or we're in the process of redefining the content on the website that will match one of those three areas. And then we have different levels of awareness for those three too, because you have people who are just for example, what are the risks of not migrating my data on my server that's, a Windows 2008 server? And so we can define a lot of that, the problem, and then increase the risk level, or increase them understanding what would be the risks of not migrating soon, and then taking them by the hand through those different levels until they reach the decision. Well, we'll either do it ourselves, or we will hire you, or we need your help, and so on and so forth.
So I'm hearing that they would have, let's say they've got each of those three products and they're trying to work backwards from what the questions somebody would be grappling with before they would even need one of those products.
Mm-hmm.
And so it sounds to me like what they had to do is kind of reverse engineer the questions. So then they have the question like end of Windows Server 2008, and you would have them write a blog post, let's say, that, answers that. And then maybe at the bottom of that blog post say, well, if this is the kind of thing that you have been weighing, here's one of three products that we have, but this one in particular is probably what you're looking for that might help you, if this is indeed your problem. Is that kind of how you do it?
It kind of. Keep in mind that we have a lot of blog posts that have very specific terminologies in there that will match what people are looking for when they're in a particular need. And here's an example. One of the most popular products or offerings is HP 3000, which no longer is being served. It's no longer supported. Okay. And right now, those systems, the HP 3000, are dying and people are scrambling. So a lot of people who are doing something about HP 3000 are usually in the hurting, or at least in the thinking stage. So we would write articles about HP 3000, why it's important to change now and all that, although we're kind of matching what the intent is already, but we're basically trying to identify we're the ones that will be the perfect person for you. And that particular client actually has a lot of credentials, and they were actually nominated by Hewlett-Packard as being the people in the industry for this particular service.
Fantastic.
So they're at that hurting. They're ready. They just need that little push. And this is where we can define the three levels of service for that particular offering. Then you've got the Windows 2008 or whatever, where people are now having systems that are slowly becoming obsolete or slowly becoming risky to maintain, or more costly to maintain, to upgrade. And so what we will talk about is more, that's the apathetic, right? So now we probably are going to write content or position content around doing something about their situation before it's too late. And then we have like a risk assessment form that we've created for the client so that people can answer a few questions, and it grades them on their level of risk. So should they do something right now? So it's red, or maybe they should do something very soon, maybe within the next 12 months, 24 months, that's the yellow. Or you're fine, you're okay, you can stay where you are, and that's green.
Gotcha.
And that helps that level of determination of what level of awareness they are. Now, then you've got people who are just looking for, now they're at the O or the A, and they're really just looking for information. How do I do a data migration? How do I, are my applications compatible with this cloud service? Or, hey, can you give me a comparison between Google Cloud versus AWS? So on and so forth. And so they're more in the very informational stage. And we do offer content for that. Now, here's the thing is, once they're there, we want to get them into, now those cycles are really long. So it's not like you make a buying decision overnight, but we want to create a relationship with the person landing on the site. So now we have mechanisms in place so that once they get to that article, we either offer more information. Hey, there's more articles or related articles to that, or B, how about you get on a mailing list, and we'll just send you information related to this topic as we go along, as we put it out, and you'll be informed about this. And then throughout that process, we try to raise the notch level from O to A to T, and then finally to H.
Got it. So in the background, I'm seeing the thinking of, you've got kind of a matrix of content for the O, the A, the T, and the H, and that you're starting to tag things. And as a person who's, spent a lot of time in marketing teams, I think we're starting to hear, and it's, really interesting that we've gone this far in the conversation without really getting into it, but I'm starting to hear little pieces of the funnel and little pieces of how we can start to think of this person as a early lead, maybe a marketing qualified lead, and then maybe on to sales qualified, because it seems to me that, we have by their actions, if they were an O, their action is simply read something to become aware, and if they're an A, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's put something in front of them that shows you empathize with,
Yes.
how they're feeling, and you're getting them to want to research. And like you said, that might be an offer of, well, just here, go look at related content, just engage with the content. And then maybe T, it's put yourself in the place of getting our teaching on a regular basis with emails. And then maybe H, we're now facilitating them getting into a demo or some kind of,
Exactly.
heavier conversion. So, it does seem, but you've very purposefully, I think, taken us as far away from our comfort zone of that good old funnel and all of those
Yeah.
things that, we want to just we want to consummate the deal, baby. But you've, helped us to step well away from that. We end up there, but we first have to spend a lot of our time in that buyer's head, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's precisely the same idea, except I'm not a big fan of, top of funnel, middle funnel, and bottom of funnel, or,
Right.
Marketing qualified lead, a sales qualified lead, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying I'm not a big fan. It's just whenever I position content around that funnel, I prefer to look at it from the user standpoint. Because when you say bottom of funnel, are they a marketing qualified lead? Well, that is related to the organization. And I kind of turned that on its head a little bit. I look, where is the client at? And then what can we help them reach their goals? Can we take them by the hand and take them to the next level, to where they want to be?
Yes.
There's an old saying that Brian Tracy in The Psychology of Selling says, "A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still." And
okay.
And I like that analogy, especially in the funnel, because we try to force things sometimes, and we knock people over the head, and we try to speed date, and the courting process from first date to marriage proposal is way too short.
Yeah, and I'll match you with a phrase. The one that comes to mind for me is, where you stand depends on where you sit. And I think it's very true. And if we think about the people sitting in the, let's say, proverbial cubicle next to us in sales, sure, of course, there's a commission at the end of the rainbow for them, and they do need to tag that person by what stage of the sales cycle are they at. However, we as marketers, I think we're held to a higher level. And what we have to do is we have to sit in the buyer's chair. We have to think like the buyer. And the minute we do that, like you said, we leave the organization's frame of mind and we adopt their frame of mind. And I think everything gets easier. We notice instantly when we look back at our website, we notice the ways the content could be improved. We notice the way that the pathway from one page to another doesn't make sense for where they're at. So I think that's probably, if I would imagine, one thing that somebody would take from this whole exploration we've had is to get that kind of buyer-centered view, don't you think?
Precisely. A lot of people ask me when I used to do copywriting classes, what happens when you have writer's block? And I tell them, the fact that you have writer's block is because you don't know your market enough. Go back to your market, do more market research, ask more questions, dig deeper, probe more, try to find out, for example, if a client has clients, call those clients, find out what their experiences are, get to understand where they're at. So the point is that the more you do that, and especially from a search engine or even a digital marketing standpoint, is that you're basically giving people what they specifically want to reach their needs and goals. And I say this, the best way to think like Google is not to think like Google. It is to think like the audience that Google's serving, which is your audience. It's to think about the final user. And
it's hilarious to me. You're right. And, think like a human, or think specifically like the human who needs you. It's just that we have algorithms at a search engine that are gauging how human we actually act.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the whole concept behind BERT. The latest algorithm update with Google, which is the bidirectional natural language processing, where basically Google is learning how people talk about things, not about what they talk about, but how they talk about things.
Right.
So the variations, the synonyms, the different metaphors that people use in order to get to pieces of information they're looking for. And that's important because and you want to beat them. Like a lot of people say, oh, how do I optimize for Google? How do I get Google to don't do that.
Yeah.
Think about your user, serve your user, give your user what they want, and serve them where they're at. Exactly what you said earlier with your analogy, your little quip. And that will help you get noticed by Google, which then will get you noticed by your end user.
Yeah. So if we can turn this on you just for a second, because you've been talking about applying these skills and, you certainly practice what you preach. You put this stuff out, you speak from the stage, you've written large articles, and I know even a book has been put out there with your stuff in it. And, you've been teaching in colleges with this, but this is, I'm sure, a little bit part of what you're trying to do as well for your own self. And you've had to this whole time figure out not only how to do this craft, but to do this craft in a way that is self-sustaining for you as a business. So take me through for a minute how it has been as a practitioner who's had to pay the bills with this ability, and what kind of things, and which businesses you kind of brought as you were trying to find the right model to make you, make this work on your own.
Let me take it back because it'll give you an understanding of why I do everything that I do. First of all, I was just recently diagnosed. I'm 52 years old. I was recently diagnosed with ADHD. And it kind of explains a lot of my life. But one of the things that people with ADHD have is something called RSD, Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria. And the reason why it's important is because when I first started out, I remember I had this fear of rejection, and I was 18 years old. I just met the person that later became my wife. She already had a daughter. And so I became an instant daddy, an instant husband, all that stuff. And I had to provide for my family.
Yep.
So, and I was still in college back then, and I needed to do something. So I decided to take on a sales commission job. And of course, hating rejection, I was miserable. I was terrible. Yeah. I wasn't making any sales at all. And in fact, I remember declaring bankruptcy. I was still in my early 20s. I declared bankruptcy because I had 18 credit cards to buy groceries. So what I started to do is, and this, you start turning your quote unquote your car into a university on wheels. So every time I would go to a call, I would listen to Brian Tracy, Tom Hopkins, to Tony Alessandra, to Dan Kennedy, and all those guys. And I learned something that was key was I hate outbound. That's why I love inbound. I want to position myself so that people would come to me and knock on my door rather than me going out there and then trying to cold call and prospect for people.
Oh, I see.
So, and that way I wouldn't be rejected, right? So one of my very first jobs was, I was 19 years old. I was a salesperson for an insurance company, and I had to prospect. This is the old days of old school insurance sales where you have to knock on doors and, pick up premiums from your clients every month.
Yeah.
And I decided to do one simple thing. I started to write a sales letter that I would mail out to people. And I didn't have to see them. I didn't have to knock on doors. And those who would call me to book a consultation with me to do like a financial audit or whatever the case is, I knew they were half sold. Now I didn't have to be rejected. And that's what started me in that, there's got to be something with this copywriting thing, right? And so what happened is that later on, that translated into so I was hired by a doctor who asked me to do the same thing. I was writing sales letters. I was writing direct mail pieces. I was writing ads. I was producing full 30-minute infomercials. I would usually play late at night back then. And some of those infomercials, sometimes I see them still playing after so many years. It's amazing. But the point is that one thing led to another. And here's to answer to your question. That was my goal. I mean, the reason why I'm happy and I'm blessed to be as successful that I am today is because I position myself so that people call me and they contact me and they're coming to me rather than me going out there. Yes, I do get a lot of referrals, a lot of word of mouth, a lot of people talking about me out there that refer me clients. But it's also the fact that I'm very well known in my industry. I became what Dan Kennedy says, being prolific. And so that people who come to me and they say, yeah, I've heard about you. I've been a follower. Here's an example. So there's a guy that I follow on YouTube on how to grow your agency. His name is Tim Conley. And I've been following this guy for a long time. In fact, I just shouted out to him on LinkedIn this morning. And I sent him a question. It was a YouTube video on hiring staff. And I asked him a question. His response, dude, you taught me about copywriting 20 years ago. You were actually the guy that put me on the path on how to start this whole digital marketing thing.
Yeah.
And I realized that's it. That's exactly how I've envisioned myself. In fact, one of my first books that I wrote called Power Positioning was really the story of how I gotten to be known in my industry. I did seminars. I had offered free seminars at a local a meeting. Back then, it was like a mailroom, but they had a meeting rental room, and I would do. And it was a JV with the place where I said, "Look, let me do these in the back. I will promote you, but I will do these for free. You don't have to charge me a rental." He says, "No problem." And then that got busier and busier to the point where there's no like standing room only. It was like not people couldn't find chairs in order to get into those meeting rooms, and that's how it got me started on this whole thing that led me to where I am today.
That's amazing. And it's, it seems rather meta, right? Because if people, for example, go onto your website, they'll see you are using copy to do this exact same thing and allow them to eventually work their way into the prolific writings that you have and get a sense of really who you are. But I guess the way, there's two ways people can take this. And if they're kind of cynical, they can look at it going, well, you're using kind of like Jedi mind tricks and you're trying to get us into using you. And I guess the other way to look at it is none of us is exempt from this. Like even the act of selling marketing services, where you're helping somebody understand how they can communicate their position, you are doing positioning, right? Like you can't do it without doing it.
Well, and it's funny because when you say that, I learned only later on what like things like NLP and all these persuasion tactics.
Right.
And I know that whenever I first started out, I applied some of these sales tactics that I've learned, but it wasn't so much for me to use them in order to get more sales. It was just to help me get positioned so that people—
Or you did it without even knowing that it had a name.
Exactly. And then when I first started out, and I remember reading my very first book on marketing, not a book on selling, but it was a book on marketing. It was the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing by Jack Trout and Al Ries. And that book changed my life because it really taught me about they call it the law of leadership. It's better to be first in the mind than the first in the market, right? So, and I really love that because it really is all about positioning. So that's why I started to apply a lot of the stuff that I do, and it's really not. It's my empathy too. I'll back up a little bit because I had rejection sensitive dysphoria. My goal was to make sure people don't reject me. And the way to do that is to give them what they want, to be as sensitive to their needs, their wants, their goals, their situations. When I write copy and I do market research before I write copy, or even when I do SEO, I try to understand the user. Where are they at? What's going on in their minds? What's happening in their lives right now? What's keeping them up at night? What are the problems they're facing? What are the events that in their life that are shaking them up, that are making them smile, happy, whatever the case is? And basically, all you do is just connect it. Eugene Schwartz talks about copywriting being a way to channel those needs and wants into products and services. And that's really what it is. And so I would find ways to connect with my audience. And the more I connect with my audience, the more I would sell. And that's all it is. I'm not trying to persuade them. I'd rather them making a decision on their own. And, you want to call that Jedi mind tricks and all that. I'm just being me, and I'm not doing anything specifically to again, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. I'm not there to try to convince them. I want them to convince themselves, but I want to give them enough ammunition to get them to a level where they're making that decision on their own. And that way they own that decision. They come to me, they're ready. They're quote unquote hot prospects because they've made the decision on their own. They own it.
Yeah. And everybody's just ultimately trying to navigate through the problems that they have in life. And, you've just shown me that the principles that you've talked about really boil down to things that are everyday communication with all the people, not only commercial, but the people in your life. I mean, you as a dad, as a husband, and you have had these things that feed into the. I know you support certain charities because you've lost a wife to cancer, and you've had other people who are, trying to find ways to grapple with what they're dealing with, and you're just giving them, through just your empathy, just how you do things. You're just helping them realize things within themselves that maybe make them change their behavior a little bit. Maybe they support a charity that you believe in. Maybe they help a person because they saw that you helped them. Whatever it is, it just seems that you just embody this stuff, Michel. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and just talking to us about this. Can you tell us how people can reach out to you and learn about your agency?
Sure. So my agency is called Shelly Solutions, and if you ever wondered what Shelly means, and I told you at the beginning of the call that most of my clients who are American called me Michael, right. And so when I met my current wife, who is European, and she says, your name is Michel, and I said, right, but most of my clients are American. She said, I don't care, so I'll call you Michelle. So that became Michelle, and now it's Shelly. Now she says Shelly. So right. So that was like my nickname at home. And so cool. I called Shelly Solutions. So I don't have a website for Shelly Solutions simply because I don't need one. But I do have my own website, and that's michelfortin.com or michaelfortin.com. Either or, you'll get to the same location. And again, it's a tool that if it basically opens a door for people who come knocking, but people are coming knocking. I'm not going out there to look for a business. I don't do any kind of paid marketing or anything like that. But anyways, I know that's neither here nor there, but that's where they can reach me.
Well, I mean, it is. I think for people who are maybe at earlier stages of this journey and are not prolific yet, this is what it does lead to when you've communicated as much as you have. And I think people can probably, if they want to go that route, that they can probably look at the way that you're working now and realize that could be their future. Michel, thank you so much again. And I just want to, thank the listener again. You have probably heard Michel drop so many different references and different acronyms. I'm going to put as many as I can possibly catch in the show notes, and I'd encourage you to go to funnelreboot.com and catch them there. If you like what you've heard today, I would also encourage you to find somebody that you thought of as you were listening to Michel and I talk. And if you could share this with them, just forward them the link or tell them about the show and have them download it on their listening app. This is how we get the show to more people and help more people with how they can reboot their marketing. So once again, Michel, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter at Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.